There are 3 books in the Bible that don't just give answers. They ask questions, deep questions, uncomfortable ones. The kind that stay with you long after you've closed the page. The first is Proverbs. It speaks with confidence, clarity, certainty. It tells us that God is wise, that the world is ordered, that life makes sense. Do what is right, and things will go well. Choose evil, and it will catch up with you. Cause and effect. Simple, clean, fair. But then you turn the page, and everything begins to shift. Because Ecclesiastes steps in, and it challenges everything you just thought you understood. It looks at the same world, but sees something very different. The righteous suffer, the wicked prosper. Hard work doesn't always pay off. Good people don't always win. Life, it says, is like smoke. Here one moment, gone the next. Unpredictable, uncontrollably, impossible to fully grasp. And suddenly, you're left asking a question you weren't prepared for. Is the world really fair? Is God truly just? And that question, that tension, that uncertainty leads us to the final and most intense book of wisdom, the book of Job. And Job doesn't just explore the question, it pulls you into it. The story begins somewhere unexpected, not on earth, but in heaven, a place described like a divine council, a command center of the universe. God is there, surrounded by spiritual beings, and among them, one stands out. He's called the Satan, not a name, a title, meaning the accuser, the one who opposes, and he raises a challenge, not against Job, but against God himself. He points to Jobber, man described as righteous, blameless, faithful, and he asks a dangerous question. Does Job really love God, or is he just playing the system? Maybe Job is good because life is good. Maybe his faith is just a transaction, a deal. Take away the blessings and watch what happens. So God allows the test, and in a moment, everything collapses. Job loses his wealth, his home, his children, everything. And the shocking part, he didn't deserve any of it. Even God said so. And yet, in the middle of unimaginable loss, Job does something incredible. He worships, but only for a moment. Because in chapter 3, the silence breaks, and we hear what's really inside. A cry, a curse, a deep, raw expression of pain. Job doesn't curse God, but he curses the day he was born. And then come the voices, his friends. They sit with him, they mourn with him, and then they begin to speak, and everything changes, because they believe something very simple. God is just. The world is fair. You get what you deserve. So if Job is suffering, there must be a reason. You must have sinned. And for the next stretch of the story, they argue back and forth. In long, poetic, emotional dialogue, they try to explain the unexplainable. They invent reasons, list possible sins, build arguments, but Job stands his ground. I am innocent, and he is. But as the conversation continues, something shifts inside him. At times, he trusts God. At times, he questions him. And at his lowest moments, He says what many are afraid to say out loud. He accuses God of being unfair, reckless, unjust, and finally, he demands an answer. God, explain yourself. And then God responds, not with a whisper, not with a quiet voice, but out of a storm, a whirlwind. And what he says is not what anyone expected. Because God doesn't explain the suffering. He doesn't mention the Satan. He doesn't justify himself. Instead, he asks questions. He takes Job on a journey. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Can you command the morning? Do you understand the depths of the sea? He reveals a universe, vast, complex, alive with detail. A world full of systems, patterns, creatures, forces beyond human comprehension. Things we see every day, but don't truly understand. And God does, intimately, completely. Then he points to creatures of immense power, beasts of chaos and strength, wild, untamed, dangerous. And he says something surprising. They are part of my world, not mistakes, not accidents, but woven into the design. And then silence. That's it. No direct answer, no explanation, just perspective. And suddenly, everything becomes clear. From Job's point of view, God seemed unjust, but God's view is infinitely bigger. He sees every thread, every outcome, every layer of reality. What feels like chaos is part of a complexity we cannot grasp. And Job realizes something profound. He doesn't need all the answers. He needs trust. He responds with humility, not because his questions were wrong, but because his understanding was limited. And in that moment, he finds peace. But the story doesn't end there. God restores everything Job lost, double. And it raises another question. Is this a reward? No, because the whole story just showed us that suffering wasn't punishment. So restoration is not payment. It's a gift, an act of grace from a God whose wisdom goes beyond human logic. And now, Job is different. Not because his life is perfect again, but because his perspective has changed. He becomes the kind of person who can trust God no matter what comes, good or bad. And that's the point. Because Proverbs gives us truth, Ecclesiastes gives us tension, but Job gives us depth. Together, they don't simplify life. They prepare you for it. They teach you that wisdom isn't just about knowing what's right. It's about trusting God, even when nothing makes sense, even when the answers don't come, even when life feels like chaos. Because sometimes the greatest wisdom is learning to trust the one who sees everything when you can't. And that is the story of Job.